Chloe Sterling had spent 412 days building something that could change the entire financial trading industry. 412 days of skipped meals, sleepless weekends, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. She had poured every ounce of her genius into a proprietary trading algorithm, a self-learning system that could predict market shifts 48 hours before they happened with terrifying accuracy. And tonight, at the Apex Capital milestone party on the rooftop of one of Chicago's most exclusive lounges, she was supposed to finally get the recognition she deserved. She stood near the bar in a navy blue dress she had bought specifically for this evening, tugging at the hem every few minutes. The rooftop was packed with hedge fund managers, venture capitalists, and tech investors. The kind of people who smelled money the way sharks smelled blood. Crystal chandeliers hung from a temporary canopy overhead, and the Chicago skyline glittered behind floor-to-ceiling glass panels like a postcard nobody could afford to live inside. Chloe scanned the room for Gavin Hayes, her boss, her ex-boyfriend, the man who had promised her 6 months ago that tonight would be her night. "I'll introduce you as the lead architect," he had said, squeezing her hand across a dinner table. "Everyone will know your name." She believed him. She always believed him. Gavin appeared on the small stage near the terrace edge, microphone in hand, his tailored charcoal suit catching the light. He had the kind of face that magazines loved, sharp jaw, easy smile, the confident posture of a man who had never been told no. The crowd quieted down. Phones came out. Someone from a financial news outlet adjusted a camera on a tripod near the front. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gavin began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. 12 months ago, I had a vision to build the most advanced predictive trading engine the market has ever seen. Chloe felt her stomach tighten. "I had a vision." He said I. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Apex Capital's flagship algorithm, my algorithm, has been officially licensed by 3 of the top 10 global investment firms." My algorithm. The room erupted in applause. Chloe's fingers went cold around her glass. She waited for the next sentence, the one where he said her name, the one where he turned to her and gestured for her to join him on stage. She had imagined it a dozen times this week, the spotlight swinging toward her, the applause shifting in her direction, the validation she had earned with every single line of code. It never came. Instead, Gavin kept talking. He talked about his late nights, his breakthroughs, his sacrifices. He painted a picture of a lone genius who had single-handedly dragged Apex Capital into the future, and the crowd ate it up like dessert. Chloe set her glass down and took a step forward. Her heart was hammering. She raised her hand slightly, trying to catch Gavin's eye. He saw her. She knew he saw her because his jaw tightened for half a second before he looked away. "And now," Gavin continued, turning back to the audience with a wide grin, "I'd like to take this opportunity to make a few organizational announcements." Chloe froze. "Effective immediately, Apex Capital will be restructuring its analytics division. As part of this transition, we will be parting ways with several team members whose roles are no longer aligned with the company's direction." He paused, looked directly at her. "Chloe Sterling, our former junior data assistant, is among those being released. We thank her for her contributions." The word contributions landed like a slap. A few people in the crowd turned to look at her. Someone near the bar whispered something and laughed. Chloe's face burned. Junior data assistant. She had built the entire architecture from scratch. She had written over 90,000 lines of code, and he had just called her a junior data assistant on a stage in front of the most powerful people in finance, with a camera rolling. Gavin smiled at her from the stage, a thin, satisfied smile that told her everything. This was planned. This was always the plan. "Gavin," she said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "That algorithm is mine. Every line. Every function. You know that." He tilted his head like she was throwing a tantrum. "Chloe, this isn't the time or place. Security will help you collect your things on Monday." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A woman in a red dress whispered to the man next to her, eyebrows raised. A guy in a pinstripe suit shook his head like he was watching something embarrassing on television. Chloe's eyes stung. She turned toward the elevator, her heels clicking too loudly against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown to the worst moment of her life. And then a voice cut through the noise. "Hold on!" It came from the private suite on the far side of the terrace, a raised section behind tinted glass that most guests didn't even know existed. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, late 20s, with dark hair pushed back and a black suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him that morning. His face was calm, almost bored, but his eyes were razor sharp. He walked with the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked. Damian Vance, owner of Vance Global Enterprises, the man whose name alone could move stock prices. The entire rooftop went silent. Damian didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight to Gavin, hands in his pockets, and stopped at the edge of the stage. "This venue is under a Vance contract," Damian said, his voice low and even. "I'm cancelling it. Tonight. You can throw your little party somewhere else." Gavin blinked. "Damian, we had a signed agreement." "Had," Damian repeated. Past tense. He turned away from Gavin like the man had stopped existing and walked directly to Chloe, who was standing frozen halfway to the elevator, mascara threatening to betray her. "Chloe Sterling," he said, extending his hand. "I've read your work. The real work. I want you at my firm. Lead strategic partner. Full resources. You start tomorrow morning." Chloe stared at him. The rooftop was dead quiet. 200 people held their breath. "Why?" she whispered. Damian glanced back at Gavin, then looked at her again. "Because the man on that stage just fired the smartest person in this building, and I don't make the same mistakes other people do." He offered his arm. Chloe hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then she took it. They walked past the frozen crowd, past the bartender with his mouth open, past the woman in the red dress who had whispered, past Gavin Hayes standing on his stage with a dead microphone and a room full of investors who were already pulling out their phones. The elevator doors closed behind them, and Chloe Sterling's old life ended on a rooftop in Chicago, while her new one began inside a descending elevator with a man the entire city feared. She had no idea what she had just walked into. Chloe didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed Damian's assistant had arranged for her, a suite at the Langham that cost more per night than her monthly rent, and stared at the ceiling. Her phone had 47 missed calls, 31 from Gavin, 16 from former colleagues. She turned it off and dropped it into the nightstand drawer like it was contaminated. By 7 in the morning, a black car was waiting outside the lobby. The driver opened the door without a word, and 20 minutes later, Chloe was standing in front of Vance Tower, a 62-story steel and glass monolith on the edge of the Chicago River. She had walked past this building 100 times during her years at Apex Capital. She always assumed the people inside were untouchable. Now the front desk had her name on a visitor badge before she even opened her mouth. The elevator climbed to the 58th floor. The doors opened into a space that looked like the bridge of a spacecraft. Clean lines, muted lighting, massive screens displaying live market feeds from 6 different exchanges, and a long conference table made of dark, polished wood.
Three analysts sat at workstations along the far wall, speaking quietly into headsets.
Damien was already there, standing near the window with a tablet in one hand and a black coffee in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but it didn't show in his posture. He turned when Chloe walked in and set the tablet down. "You found the place?"
"Hard to miss,"
Chloe said, glancing around.
"It's the tallest thing on the block."
The faintest smile crossed his face. He gestured to a chair across from him and sat down. A woman in a gray blazer appeared almost instantly, setting a coffee in front of Chloe without asking how she took it. Black, 2 sugars. Chloe looked up.
"Your former assistant mentioned it once during an industry mixer,"
Damien said, answering the question she hadn't asked.
"I pay attention to details."
Chloe wrapped her hands around the mug.
"So what exactly am I doing here, Damien? Last night was... I appreciate what you did, I really do, but I've known men who make grand gestures and they usually come with a receipt."
Damien leaned back. He studied her for a moment, and she got the sense he was deciding how much to reveal. Then he reached under the table and pulled out a thick black binder. He slid it across to her. "Open it." Chloe flipped the cover. Inside were printed transaction records, hundreds of them, cross-referenced with timestamps, shell company names, and routing numbers that bounced through 4 different countries. Her trained eye caught the pattern within 30 seconds. Layered trades, mirror accounts, wash sales disguised as legitimate high-frequency transactions.
"This is market manipulation,"
she said quietly. "Yes."
"Where did you get this?"
"My forensic accounting team has been tracking these transactions for 11 months. Every single one of them traces back to the same source." Chloe looked up. She already knew the answer. "Apex Capital," Damien confirmed. "Gavin Hayes has been running a parallel trading operation using your algorithm. The version he stole from you is the engine behind all of it. He modified the output layer so the trades look organic, but the underlying logic, your logic, is doing the heavy lifting." Chloe closed the binder slowly. Her jaw was tight. All those months of work, all those nights she spent debugging code until her vision blurred. He hadn't just stolen credit for her algorithm. He had weaponized it.
"Why haven't you reported this already?" she asked.
"Because reporting it gets me a headline and a regulatory investigation that takes 3 years to go anywhere. Gavin's legal team would bury the evidence in motions and countersuits before the first hearing date. I've watched people try to take down operations like his through official channels. They lose, every time."
"So what's your plan?"
Damien placed both hands flat on the table. "I want to dismantle him. Financially, legally, publicly. I want every investor who backed him to pull out. I want every contract he signed to collapse. And I want the algorithm returned to the person who built it." He paused. "But I can't do any of that without you. You're the only person alive who understands that system well enough to prove it was stolen. You wrote it. You know its fingerprints. No one else can trace the code signatures back to the original architecture the way you can." Chloe stared at the binder. Her reflection swam faintly in the polished surface of the table. She thought about the rooftop, the laughter, the word contributions dripping with contempt. She thought about the 412 days she had poured into something beautiful, only to watch someone else sign their name on it and shove her out the door.
"Full access?"
she said. "Full access. Every server, every financial record, every communication log my team has collected. You'll have a dedicated workspace, a support team, and direct authority over the forensic audit trail. No gatekeepers, no red tape."
"And if Gavin pushes back?"
"He will push back. That's what desperate men do. But you won't be dealing with that alone." Chloe looked at him carefully. She had spent 2 years working under Gavin Hayes, and in all that time he had never once asked for her opinion in a meeting. He introduced her as one of our support staff at conferences. He interrupted her mid-sentence in every presentation.
He made her feel small so consistently that she started believing she was.
Damian Vance had known her for less than 12 hours, and he was handing her the keys to a financial empire and asking her to drive. She picked up the binder and held it against her chest.
I'll need a secure terminal with offline partitioning, air-gapped from your main network. If Gavin's people are running the kind of operation I think they are, they'll have monitoring bots scanning for external access to their systems. I can't leave digital footprints until I'm ready.
Damian raised an eyebrow. Then he picked up his phone and spoke 2 sentences into it. Within 4 minutes, a technician appeared at the door with a rolling cart carrying a custom-built workstation.
Anything else? Damian asked. Chloe sat down in front of the terminal, cracked her knuckles, and pulled up the first dataset. Yeah, clear my schedule for the next month. The fluorescent glow of the twin monitors washed over her face as she typed the first command string.
Somewhere across town, Gavin Hayes was probably celebrating with champagne and handshakes, completely unaware that the woman he had thrown away was already picking apart the foundation of everything he had built, one transaction at a time. The estate sat 40 minutes outside the city on a stretch of land that didn't show up on most maps. Chloe first saw it from the back seat of Damian's car on the morning of day 4, a sprawling stone and timber property surrounded by 12 acres of oak trees, a perimeter wall disguised as a natural ridge, and a security gate that required 3 separate clearance checks before it opened. The driveway alone was a quarter-mile long, lined with mature elms that formed a canopy so thick the sunlight came through in scattered coins on the gravel.
This is where you live?
Chloe asked, leaning forward to look through the windshield. This is where I work when I need to think without interruption, Damian said. He hadn't called it home. Chloe noticed that. The decision to move her out of the hotel had come the night before. Damian had received a report from his security team that someone had attempted to access Chloe's room at the Langham using a cloned keycard. The attempt failed. The hotel system flagged the duplicate and locked the floor, but the message was clear. Gavin knew where she was staying, and he was already making moves. Damian didn't panic. He didn't raise his voice or pace around the room making dramatic phone calls. He simply looked at Chloe across the conference table at Vance Tower and said, "Pack your things. You're not safe there anymore." She packed in 11 minutes. She didn't have much. The estate had its own staff, a housekeeper named Gloria who spoke with a faint Colombian accent and kept fresh flowers in every room, a groundskeeper who nodded at Chloe once and then vanished into the tree line, and a rotating team of 4 security personnel who moved around the property so quietly she sometimes forgot they were there. Chloe was given a suite on the 2nd floor with a private study, a bathroom larger than her old apartment's living room, and a view of the back garden that sloped down toward a creek she could hear at night when the windows were open. She set up her workspace within an hour. Laptop on the mahogany desk, external monitor connected through a secure relay. Printed copies of every financial document she had gathered during her first 2 days at Vance Tower spread across the floor in a pattern that looked chaotic to anyone else, but made perfect sense to her. She worked best when she could see everything at once, the full landscape of a problem laid out like a map she could walk through. By noon, she was deep inside Gavin's corporate filings. Public records first, the SEC disclosures, the quarterly earnings reports, the investor prospectuses. She read them the way a mechanic reads engine diagnostics, looking for the readings that didn't match, and she found them within the first 2 hours. Apex Capital's reported revenue for the previous fiscal year was $142 million. Their operating expenses, according to the same filing, totaled $119 million. That left a net profit of $23 million, a respectable margin for a mid-sized trading firm. But when Chloe cross-referenced those numbers with the transaction data Damian's forensic team had compiled, the math stopped working. The transaction volumes flowing through Apex's trading accounts suggested revenue closer to $210 million. $68 million was missing from the public record. Chloe sat back in her chair and stared at the numbers. $68 million didn't just vanish, it went somewhere, and that somewhere was almost certainly offshore.
She started pulling threads. Shell companies registered in Delaware with no employees and no physical addresses. Holding entities in the British Virgin Islands that existed only on paper. Wire transfers routed through 3 intermediary banks before landing in accounts that were named after Greek mythology. Icarus Holdings, Daedalus Capital, Prometheus Group. Gavin had always been fond of classical references. He used to quote Marcus Aurelius in staff meetings to make himself sound intellectual. Apparently, he also used ancient Greek names to hide stolen money. By late afternoon, Chloe had mapped out a network of 7 offshore accounts connected to Apex Capital through a chain of shell companies that would have taken a regulatory auditor months to untangle.
She pinned the diagram to the wall of her study and stepped back to look at it. The web was intricate, deliberately complex, designed to confuse, but the money always flowed in one direction, toward Gavin. A knock at the door pulled her out of the data. Damien stood in the hallway holding 2 plates, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a side of rice that smelled like someone had cooked it with lime and cilantro. "Gloria said you skipped lunch," he said. "I lost track of time." "You've been in here for 6 hours." Chloe looked at the clock on her laptop. He was right. She hadn't eaten since the toast and coffee she grabbed on the way out of Vance Tower that morning. Damien walked in and set the plates on the small table near the window. He glanced at the wall, covered in printed documents and connecting lines drawn in red marker. "You've been busy," he said. Chloe picked up a fork and sat down across from him. "He's hiding $68 million in offshore accounts, 7 entities, 4 jurisdictions, all routing back to a single beneficial owner structure. It's sophisticated, but he made mistakes. The naming conventions are consistent across all the shells. Same registration agent, same filing dates, same legal counsel in the Caymans. Once you see the pattern, you can trace the whole thing in a straight line." Damien ate quietly for a moment, absorbing the information. "Can we use this in the arbitration filing?" "We can use it to make the arbitration filing devastating. If I can get access to the primary servers at Apex, the ones behind the encryption wall, I can match these offshore transactions to specific trades executed by my algorithm. That ties the stolen intellectual property directly to the financial fraud. It's a single evidence chain that proves theft and market manipulation in the same stroke." "What do you need to access those servers?" Chloe set her fork down. "A key, the master encryption key that controls access to Apex's private server cluster. Without it, I'm working with fragments. With it, I can pull everything." "Do you know where to get it?" Chloe thought about Nina. They hadn't spoken since the rooftop party, but she knew Nina still worked at Apex. She knew Nina had administrative access to every internal system. And she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that Nina Okoro was not the kind of woman who watched injustice happen and stayed comfortable with it. "I might," Chloe said. "Let me make a call." Damien nodded. He didn't press for details. He picked up his plate, paused at the door, and looked back at her. "Chloe, whatever you need, whenever you need it, you tell me." She met his eyes. There was something in the way he said it, steady, simple, completely without condition, that loosened a knot she had been carrying in her chest since the rooftop. She had spent 2 years working for a man who treated her brilliance like a convenience and her presence like a burden. Damien Vance treated her like she mattered, like her mind was something valuable and her comfort was something worth protecting. "Thank you," she said. She meant it for more than dinner. He left. Chloe turned back to the wall of documents, picked up her red marker, and drew one more line connecting the final shell company to Gavin's personal holding entity. The picture was almost complete. A few more pieces and the whole structure would be ready to collapse. She picked up her phone and typed a message through an encrypted app she hadn't opened in months. The recipient was Nina Okoro. "I need your help. Can we meet?" The reply came 19 minutes later. "Name the place." The Grand Hotel ballroom in Midtown Manhattan smelled like old money and fresh orchids.
Chloe had been to New York twice in her life, once for a college field trip and once for a job interview she didn't get. Walking into this room felt like entering a different planet. The ceiling was hand-painted with gold leaf accents, the tables were draped in white linen, and every person holding a champagne flute had enough capital to buy a small country.
Damien walked beside her in a deep navy suit, his hand resting lightly on her lower back as they moved through the entrance. Chloe wore a fitted emerald dress, something Damien's stylist had delivered to the estate 2 days ago without being asked. She had almost refused it on principle, but then she caught her reflection and realized she looked like someone who belonged in this room. That mattered tonight more than pride. The Private Investor Summit was an invitation-only gathering. 40 of the most influential financial backers on the East Coast sat at round tables scattered across the ballroom, each one representing billions in deployable capital. These were the people who decided which companies lived and which ones starved. And tonight, Gavin Hayes was scheduled to pitch Apex Capital's expansion plan, a bold play to secure $200 million in new funding. Chloe spotted him the moment they entered.
Gavin stood near the front podium, shaking hands with a silver-haired man she recognized from the cover of a business magazine. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who had already won. Then he saw her. His handshake faltered, his smile flickered. He recovered quickly, but Chloe caught it, that half-second fracture in his composure. He hadn't expected her here. He certainly hadn't expected her walking in beside Damien Vance. Damien guided Chloe to a reserved table near the center of the room. A small placard read, "Vance Global Enterprises." 2 of Damien's associates were already seated, tablets open, reviewing data quietly. "He's rattled," Damien said under his breath, pulling out Chloe's chair. "Good," Chloe replied. "Rattled people make mistakes." The first hour was standard fare. 3 companies presented expansion proposals: a biotech firm, a logistics startup, an AI venture out of Silicon Valley. Polite applause followed each one. The investors asked pointed questions and made notes on leather-bound pads. Then Gavin took the stage. He was smooth. Chloe had to give him that. He opened with a joke about Wall Street that got an easy laugh, then launched into a polished presentation filled with projections, graphs, and carefully edited performance metrics. His slides were gorgeous. Clean design, bold numbers, confident forecasts. He talked about Apex Capital's algorithm. He described the architecture, quoted processing speeds, showed return on investment curves that climbed like mountain peaks. Chloe watched every slide with surgical focus. She had spent the last 5 days at Damien's estate preparing for exactly this moment. She knew Gavin's presentation better than he did because the technology he was selling was hers, and she knew where the cracks were. Gavin wrapped up to solid applause. He grinned, adjusted his tie, and opened the floor for questions. A few investors raised hands. Standard stuff: risk mitigation, scalability timelines, compliance frameworks. Then Chloe raised her hand. The room shifted. A few heads turned. Gavin's smile tightened when he saw her arm in the air, but he couldn't ignore it without looking weak. The moderator, a tall woman with reading glasses on a gold chain, pointed in Chloe's direction. "Yes, the woman from the Vance table." Chloe stood. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room land on her. Her pulse kicked up, but her voice came out steady. "Thank you. I have a question about slide 14, the algorithmic efficiency breakdown." Gavin tilted his head. "Of course, go ahead." "Your presentation claims the algorithm processes derivative chain analysis at 11 milliseconds per cycle, but the architecture you're describing uses a recursive tree model, which inherently caps processing speed at around 19 milliseconds on the hardware configuration you listed on slide 9. So either the benchmark numbers are fabricated, or you're running a completely different system than the one you just showed these investors." Silence. Gavin blinked. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That's Those benchmarks were conducted by our internal testing team and verified independently.
By whom?
Chloe asked calmly.
I'd have to check the documentation.
I can save you the trouble. The efficiency rate you quoted matches a second-generation neural sort function that was designed for parallel processing, not recursive modeling. Those two systems are fundamentally incompatible. You can't run one on the framework of the other. Unless, of course, the framework you're actually using isn't the one in this presentation. Murmurs rippled across the ballroom. An older investor at a front table leaned over to whisper to his partner. A woman near the window put down her champagne glass and picked up her phone.
Gavin gripped the podium.
I think you're overcomplicating a technical nuance that—
Slide 21,
Chloe continued, pulling her own tablet from the table and holding it up.
Your projected revenue model assumes a 37% quarterly compounding rate based on current client retention. But your SEC disclosure from last quarter, which is public record, shows a net client attrition rate of 12%. That means your projections aren't aggressive. They're fictional.
The murmurs turned into full conversations. Two investors at the back table closed their folders. A man in a gray suit stood up and quietly walked toward the exit. Gavin's face had gone from confident to pale in under 3 minutes. He fumbled through his notes, looking for something to counter with. But every number Chloe had cited was sourced, time-stamped, and specific. She hadn't come to argue. She had come to dismantle.
I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, Gavin managed, his voice losing its stage polish.
I'm sure your investors would love to hear it, Chloe said. She sat down. The room stayed noisy for the rest of the evening, but the damage was already done. 3 major investment groups approached the Vance table before dessert was served, asking pointed questions about Damien's operations and expressing interest in redirecting their capital. 2 others sent formal withdrawal notices to Apex Capital's legal team before midnight. Gavin left the ballroom through a side door without saying goodbye to anyone. In the car afterward, heading back toward the airport, Damien sat across from Chloe with his arms folded. The city lights strobed across his face through the tinted windows.
You memorized his entire SEC filing?
He said.
I memorized everything he's filed in the last 18 months.
Damien studied her for a long moment.
Something shifted behind his eyes. Something that looked a lot like respect, deepening into something heavier.
He's going to come after you now, Damien said. What happened in that room? He won't let it go. Chloe looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline shrinking behind them. I'm counting on it. The call came at 11:40 at night. Chloe was sitting in the study at Damien's estate, halfway through a 3rd cup of coffee, reviewing the transaction mapping she had built from the Investor Summit fallout. 3 major backers had formally withdrawn from Apex Capital in the 48 hours since Manhattan. 2 more had sent letters requesting independent audits of their invested capital. Gavin's funding pipeline was hemorrhaging, and every hour brought a new crack in the wall. Damien appeared in the doorway with his phone still pressed to his ear. His jaw was tight.
Get dressed. We need to move.
20 minutes later, they were in the back of an armored SUV heading east on I-78 toward the New Jersey waterfront. Damien's head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Roman who had the calm demeanor of someone who had seen enough in his life to stop being surprised by anything, sat in the front passenger seat, relaying updates through an earpiece.
What's happening?
Chloe asked. The highway was nearly empty at this hour, and the SUV was doing 95 without attracting attention. Damien put his phone on speaker and set it on the seat between them. A voice Chloe didn't recognize, tight, professional, speaking in short bursts, came through.
We intercepted communications 40 minutes ago, indicating that a team of 4 individuals was dispatched to Warehouse 7 at Port Newark. The target is the transatlantic logistics hub, specifically the server room that manages routing and customs clearance for all Vance global maritime shipments across 6 countries.
Chloe looked at Damien.
They're going after your shipping network?
If someone tampers with the routing servers, every container we have in transit gets flagged from manual inspection at port. That means delays. Weeks of them. Perishable cargo spoils. Time-sensitive shipments miss their windows. Insurance claims pile up. The financial damage would be in the tens of millions before we could even diagnose the problem.
And the market would see it as operational instability, Chloe added.
Connecting the dots. Your stock valuation drops, investor confidence takes a hit, and Gavin gets to point at Vance Global and tell his remaining backers that you're the one who's falling apart, not him. Exactly. The SUV exited the highway and wound through a series of industrial roads lined with chain-link fencing and shipping containers stacked 4 high. The port at night was a strange landscape. Massive cranes silhouetted against the glow of floodlights, the distant horn of a cargo ship somewhere out on the water, and the smell of diesel and salt thick enough to taste. Warehouse 7 sat at the far end of a concrete pier, a long, aluminum-sided structure with rolling bay doors and a security office attached to the east wall.
Roman spoke into his earpiece.
Team is in position. 4 tangos confirmed inside the building. They entered through the service door on the west side approximately 12 minutes ago. No weapons visible on the perimeter camera feed. They're carrying equipment, laptops, cable kits, what looks like a portable signal relay.
Damien leaned forward. They're trying to install a remote access point on the server rack. If they get that relay connected, they can manipulate the routing data from anywhere in the world without setting foot in the building again.
Do we wait for them to finish? Roman asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer.
We go now. Quiet. Clean. Nobody gets hurt. I want them restrained, and I want whatever equipment they brought confiscated intact.
The SUV stopped 200 yards from the warehouse.
Chloe stayed in the vehicle while Damien and Roman moved toward the building on foot, joining a 6-person tactical team that had already surrounded the structure from 3 sides. Through the windshield, Chloe watched the operation unfold in near silence. Flashlights swept across the warehouse exterior. A door opened. Shadows moved inside. She heard muffled voices, commands spoken firmly but without aggression, and then quiet. The whole thing took 4 minutes. Damien's team emerged with 4 men in zip-tie restraints, walking them toward a second vehicle parked near the security office. The men looked more startled than dangerous, mid-30s, dressed in dark technical clothing, the kind of people who got hired for a job without asking too many questions about who was paying. Roman carried a black duffel bag containing their equipment. Damien waved Chloe over. She stepped out of the SUV and walked across the concrete, the night air biting through her jacket. Inside the warehouse, the server room was untouched. The relay device had been partially connected to one of the secondary racks, but hadn't been activated. Another 10 minutes, and it would have been live.
They almost made it,
Chloe said, crouching beside the server rack and examining the relay. It was a commercial-grade device, expensive, capable of creating an encrypted tunnel that would have been nearly impossible to detect through standard network monitoring. Whoever put this plan together knew exactly what they were doing. "Check the rest of the equipment," Damien said to Roman. Then he turned to Chloe. "Can you pull anything useful from what they left behind?" Chloe opened the duffel bag Roman had set on a workbench near the door. Inside were 2 laptops, a set of Ethernet cables, a USB hub, and a portable hard drive still warm from recent use. She powered on the first laptop and navigated past the login screen using a default bypass she had learned during her early years in network security. The desktop loaded, revealing a set of recently accessed files, mostly technical schematics of Vance Global's server architecture, annotated with entry points and vulnerability assessments.
"These are internal documents,"
Chloe said, scrolling through the files.
"Someone fed them detailed maps of your network infrastructure. Port configurations, firewall exceptions, IP address ranges. This wasn't a random break-in. Whoever planned this had inside knowledge of your systems."
Damien's expression darkened. Or they bought it from someone who did. Chloe opened the second laptop. This one was cleaner, fewer files, mostly communication logs. She found a chain of encrypted messages that had been partially decrypted, probably for quick reference during the operation. The messages were sparse and operational in tone, but one line caught her eye. A set of instructions sent 6 hours earlier from an anonymized account. Complete installation before 0200. Confirm relay activation. Payment transfers upon verification. G.H. G.H. Gavin Hayes. Chloe turned the laptop toward Damien. He read the message and said nothing for a long moment. "He signed his initials," Chloe said, "on an instruction to sabotage a competitor's logistics network. That's either arrogance or stupidity. With Gavin, it's usually both." Chloe carefully disconnected the portable hard drive and sealed both laptops in anti-static bags she found in the warehouse supply closet. These devices were evidence now. Physical, tangible proof that Gavin Hayes had personally ordered an operation to cripple Damien's business infrastructure. Combined with the financial fraud documentation and the stolen algorithm evidence, the case against him was growing so heavy, it was a wonder the man could still stand upright. Roman returned from processing the 4 detained operatives. All 4 are contracted through a private security firm based in Newark. The firm's client records are sealed, but we've got the laptops, the communication logs, and the relay device. Our legal team can subpoena the firm's records as part of the arbitration proceedings. Damien nodded. He looked at Chloe, standing in the middle of a warehouse at 1 in the morning, holding a bag of confiscated hard drives, her hair windblown and her coffee long gone cold somewhere back at the estate. "You should be sleeping," he said. "I'll sleep when this is over." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." They drove back to Chicago through the empty early morning highways, the city appearing slowly on the horizon like a promise that hadn't been broken yet.
Chloe held the evidence bag on her lap and watched the road unfold ahead of them. Every move Gavin made pushed him further into a corner. Every desperate play added another exhibit to the file. He was building the case against himself faster than she ever could. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nina through the encrypted channel. "Something big is happening at Apex. Call me when you can." Chloe stared at the message. The next piece was already waiting. Manhattan looked different in the afternoon. The morning version was all sharp suits and cab horns and people walking like they were late for something important. But by 2 o'clock on a Thursday, the city softened just enough to let you breathe. Chloe sat at a corner table inside the Skybridge Cafe, a narrow coffee shop wedged between 2 office buildings on West 42nd Street, connected by a glass pedestrian bridge that gave the place its name. Sunlight poured through the overhead panels and scattered warm squares across the wooden floor. She ordered a cappuccino and checked her phone. One message from Damien. "I'm nearby. Take your time." She slid the phone back into her bag and looked toward the entrance. The woman who walked in 3 minutes later was the last person anyone at Apex Capital would have suspected of disloyalty. Nina Okoro was Gavin's executive assistant, the person who managed his calendar, screened his calls, and had access to every internal system Apex operated. She was tall, sharp-featured, and carried herself with the kind of quiet efficiency that made her invisible to people who only noticed loud things. Gavin had never once considered her a threat, which was exactly why. She was the most dangerous person in his orbit. Nina spotted Chloe and walked over without hesitation. She didn't hug her. She didn't smile. She sat down, placed her handbag on the empty chair beside her, and folded her hands on the table like she was about to deliver a quarterly report. "You look good," Nina said.
"You look stressed,"
Chloe replied. "Because I am. I have about 90 minutes before anyone notices I left the building for something other than a lunch run. So let's skip the small talk." Chloe nodded. She had known Nina for 3 years. They started at Apex around the same time and became close during those early months when both of them were too junior to be invited to anything that mattered. While Chloe buried herself in code, Nina climbed the administrative ladder until she became the gatekeeper to Gavin's entire professional life. They hadn't spoken since the rooftop incident, but 2 days ago, Nina had reached out through an encrypted messaging app with 6 words that changed everything. I have what you need. He's panicking, Nina said, keeping her voice low. The cafe was half empty, but she still leaned in. After the investor summit, 3 of his biggest backers pulled out. His legal team has been in the office until midnight every night trying to restructure the contracts. He fired 2 junior analysts last week for no reason other than he needed someone to yell at. What about the servers? Nina reached into her handbag and pulled out a small black USB drive, no bigger than a thumbnail. She placed it on the table between them and covered it with her palm. This is the master encryption key to Apex Capital's private server cluster. Every file, every communication, every transaction log. It's all behind this key. Chloe stared at the drive. Her throat tightened. She had spent weeks building forensic trails and tracing digital signatures through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. She had recovered fragments from the New Jersey warehouse servers and pieced together partial evidence, but the core, the definitive, undeniable proof that Gavin had stolen her algorithm and used it to run illegal trades, lived behind a wall of military-grade encryption on Apex's private servers. Without this key, she could build a strong case. With it, she could build an unbreakable one.
Nina,
Chloe said carefully.
if he finds out you did this, he won't. But if he does, then he does.
Nina's expression didn't change.
Chloe, I watched him take everything from you and smile about it. I sat in the room when he rehearsed that speech for the rooftop party. He practiced the part where he called you a junior data assistant. He said it 4 different ways to see which one would sting the most. I wanted to quit that night, but I stayed because I knew this day would come.
Chloe felt something hot rise in her chest. She had spent the last 2 weeks surrounded by encrypted data, server logs, and legal documents. Everything had been clinical, strategic, controlled. But hearing that Gavin had rehearsed her humiliation, had stood in front of a mirror choosing the exact words to cut her down, broke through every wall she had built around that memory. She blinked hard and swallowed.
Thank you,
she said quietly. Nina slid the drive across the table.
Don't thank me. Just finish him.
Chloe pocketed the drive and wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. The warmth steadied her.
There's something else,
Nina added, pulling out a folded sheet of paper.
He's been making calls to a private legal firm in the Cayman Islands. I don't have the details, but the invoices are coded under a project name I've never seen before. Something called Nightfall Protocol. It started about 2 weeks after the rooftop party.
Chloe frowned.
Nightfall Protocol? I don't know what it is, but the billing amounts are massive, 6 figures per week. Whatever he's planning, he's spending serious money on it.
Chloe tucked the paper into her bag. Another thread to pull, another layer of whatever Gavin was building in the shadows. Nina checked her watch and stood up.
I need to get back. If you need anything else, use the same channel. But Chloe, be fast. The walls are closing in on him, and trapped animals do ugly things.
She picked up her handbag, squeezed Chloe's shoulder once, and walked out through the side door without looking back. Chloe sat alone in the cafe for another 10 minutes, turning the USB drive over in her pocket. 3 years ago, she and Nina used to eat lunch together at a deli across from the Apex office, splitting a turkey sandwich because neither of them could afford a whole one on their starting salaries. Now, Nina had just risked her career and her safety to hand Chloe the key to bringing down the man who had destroyed both of their dignities. Her phone buzzed. Damien. Got what you needed? She typed back, everything and more. We need to get to Boston. His reply came in 4 seconds. Plane leaves in 2 hours. Chloe left a 20 on the table, grabbed her bag, and stepped out onto 42nd Street. Somewhere above her, the glass sky bridge caught the afternoon sun and threw a beam of light down the sidewalk like a runway. She walked straight through it without slowing down. The encryption key was in her pocket. The proof was waiting behind it. And a man named Gavin Hayes had absolutely no idea that the most loyal person in his building had just handed his empire to the woman he threw away. The Vance Innovation Lab sat on the top floor of a converted textile factory in South Boston, tucked behind a row of old brick warehouses that still smelled faintly of salt and industrial rust. From the outside, the building looked abandoned. The windows on the lower floors were blacked out, the signage was stripped, and the only indication that anyone worked inside was a single security camera mounted above a steel door that had no handle on the outside. Damien punched a 6-digit code into a panel hidden behind a loose brick. The door slid open sideways with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, the space transformed completely. White walls, polished concrete floors, rows of high-performance servers humming behind glass enclosures that kept the temperature at a constant 62 degrees. Blue LED strips lined the ceiling, casting everything in a cool, focused glow. 6 workstations sat in the center of the room, each equipped with triple monitors and isolated network connections that ran through their own encrypted satellite uplinks. Chloe stepped inside and stopped walking. She had worked with good hardware before. Apex Capital had decent systems, but this was something else entirely. This was the kind of setup that intelligence agencies built when they wanted to crack foreign communication networks. Every machine in this room was air-gapped, physically disconnected from the public internet, which meant nothing could get in or out without someone physically carrying it through that steel door.
You built all this for financial analysis?
Chloe asked, running her hand along the edge of a server rack. I built this for situations exactly like the one we're in, Damien replied. He pulled a chair out from the center workstation and gestured for her to sit. Everything you do in here stays in here. No leaks, no traces, no digital footprint that Gavin's team can pick up. Chloe sat down and pulled the USB drive from her jacket pocket. She held it between her thumb and forefinger for a moment, studying it like it was a grenade with the pin half pulled. In many ways, it was. Whatever lived behind this encryption key would either prove everything she believed or reveal that Gavin had been smarter than she gave him credit for. She plugged the drive into the terminal. A prompt appeared on screen asking for a decryption passphrase. Nina had sent it through the encrypted channel an hour after their meeting at the cafe. A 40-character string of randomized letters, numbers, and symbols that would have taken a brute force attack roughly 900 years to crack. Chloe typed it in, pressed enter. The screen went black for 4 seconds. Then the files began loading. Thousands of them. Folder after folder cascading down the directory tree like a waterfall of data. Financial records, internal memos, communication logs, source code repositories, tax filings, board meeting transcripts. The entire digital skeleton of Apex Capital, stripped bare and laid out on her monitors. Damien stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the files populate. He said nothing. He understood that this was her territory, and the best thing he could do was stay out of her way. Chloe started with the source code. She opened the main repository, the one Gavin had presented to investors as his proprietary creation, and placed it side by side with a backup of her original codebase that she had saved on a personal encrypted drive 18 months ago. She had kept that backup out of habit, the same way a painter might photograph a canvas before handing it to a gallery. She never imagined she would need it like this. The comparison took less than 20 minutes. Line for line, function for function, variable name for variable name. Gavin hadn't even bothered to change the comments she had written in the margins of her code. Little notes to herself like, optimize this loop later, and check edge case for negative float values. Her handwriting was all over his so-called masterpiece. He had copied the entire system, slapped a new interface on the front end, and called it his own. It was plagiarism so brazen it was almost insulting.
He didn't even rename the core modules, Chloe muttered, scrolling through the files. The neural sort engine is still labeled C_V4. My initials, my version number. He just buried it 3 folders deep so nobody would look. Damien leaned closer to the screen. Can you timestamp the original creation? Already on it. Chloe pulled up the metadata logs from her backup drive. Every file carried a digital creation stamp, date, time, machine ID, and user credentials. Her files were dated 14 months before Gavin's versions. The proof was baked into the data itself. No amount of legal maneuvering could argue with a timestamp embedded at the operating system level. She spent the next 3 hours going deeper. The communication logs were even more damaging than the code.
Internal emails between Gavin and his chief technology officer showed a deliberate, step-by-step plan to extract Chloe's work, migrate it to a separate development environment, and systematically remove her access to the original files. One email, dated 3 weeks before the rooftop party, read, "Make sure her credentials are revoked by Friday. I don't want her logging in and seeing the fork before the announcement." Chloe read that email 3 times. Her hands were steady on the keyboard, but something behind her ribs ached in a way that had nothing to do with physical pain. He had been planning her removal for weeks, maybe months. Every kind word, every promise about the rooftop party, every reassurance that her time was coming, all of it was theater designed to keep her quiet long enough for him to finish stealing everything she had built. She moved on to the financial records. This was where Nina's warning about the Nightfall Protocol started making sense. Buried inside a subfolder labeled Consulting Expenses Offshore was a series of transactions routed through 3 shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, each one funneling money into an account that traced back to a private legal firm specializing in intellectual property disputes. Gavin wasn't just stealing her algorithm. He was preemptively building a legal fortress to claim he had invented it first, complete with fabricated development logs and backdated patent applications.
He's constructing a false paper trail,
Chloe said, leaning back in her chair.
If I had tried to sue him without this data, his lawyers would have buried me in forged documentation. I would have spent years in court fighting ghosts.
Damien's expression hardened. Can you package all of this into a single evidentiary file? Chloe was already typing.
Give me 2 more hours. I want everything cross-referenced, time-stamped, and formatted so cleanly that even a first-year law student could follow the trail. When I'm done, there won't be a single gap for his lawyers to crawl through.
Damien nodded once and walked to the far side of the lab. He made a phone call she couldn't hear, speaking in short, clipped sentences. When he came back, he set a fresh coffee on her desk. "Our legal team will be ready when you are," he said. Chloe picked up the coffee without looking away from the screen. The data was singing to her now. Every file, every timestamp, every careless email Gavin had written thinking nobody would ever read it. All of it was clicking into place like the final pieces of a puzzle she had been solving her entire career. Gavin Hayes had spent months building a fortress out of lies. Chloe was about to bring the whole thing down with the truth. 32,000 feet above Pennsylvania, Chloe sat inside a cabin that looked more like a command center than an aircraft. Damien's private transport was a modified long-range jet with the rear section converted into a working suite, dual monitors mounted on swivel arms, a secure satellite communication array, and a conference table bolted to the floor with seating for 6. The engines hummed at a low frequency that vibrated through the armrests, and outside the oval windows, the clouds looked close enough to grab. They were 2 hours into the flight from Boston back to Chicago. Chloe had spent the first hour organizing the evidence package she had assembled at the Innovation Lab. 412 pages of cross-referenced documentation, source code comparisons, time-stamped metadata, financial routing records, and internal communications that painted a clear and devastating picture of everything Gavin Hayes had done. The file sat on an encrypted drive in her bag, backed up on a second drive locked in the jet's onboard safe.
She wasn't taking chances. Damien sat across from her, reviewing a separate set of documents his legal team had prepared for the upcoming arbitration filing. His reading glasses, which Chloe had never seen him wear before, made him look oddly human. Less like a man who could buy buildings on a phone call, and more like a graduate student pulling an all-nighter before a thesis defense. "Your legal team moves fast," Chloe said, scrolling through the arbitration brief on her screen.
They don't have a choice. I pay them to move fast.
Chloe almost smiled. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her expression dropped. "What is it?" Damien asked, looking up. "An alert from my financial monitoring setup. Someone just filed an emergency injunction against me in the Southern District of New York. They're trying to freeze all of my personal assets, bank accounts, investment holdings, everything." Damien set his documents down. "When was it filed?" 40 minutes ago. The motion claims I'm in possession of stolen proprietary trade secrets belonging to Apex Capital and requests an immediate asset freeze pending a full investigation." Chloe read the filing summary twice, her eyes moving quickly across the dense legal language. They're citing the Economic Espionage Act. They're saying I took classified financial data when I left Apex and that I'm using it to conduct corporate sabotage against Gavin's firm. That's absurd. He fired you on a stage in front of 200 people. Absurd doesn't matter if a judge signs off on it before we can respond. An emergency injunction can be granted within hours if the filing party presents enough urgency. And Gavin's legal team has clearly been preparing this for a while. The paperwork is thick. They've included affidavits from 3 Apex employees swearing that I had access to restricted systems and downloaded files without authorization before my termination. Damien pulled his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Those affidavits are fabricated." "Obviously. But the judge reviewing this at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night doesn't know that. All they see is a stack of sworn statements and a request to protect corporate assets. If this goes through, my accounts get locked and I lose the ability to fund any independent legal action. I become completely dependent on someone else's resources to fight back." Chloe paused. She looked at Damien. "That's the point," she said. "This isn't about winning the injunction. It's about crippling me before I can use the evidence. If my assets are frozen, his lawyers can argue that any legal action I take is being funded by a third party with a competing business interest. That's you. They'll claim the entire case is a corporate attack orchestrated by Vance Global, and the arbitration panel might throw out the filing on conflict of interest grounds before I even get to present the evidence." Damien stared at her. "He's trying to turn your connection to me into a liability." "Exactly." The cabin went quiet, except for the engine hum. Chloe could feel the clock ticking. Somewhere on the ground, a clerk was processing paperwork that could dismantle everything they had built over the past 3 weeks. Every hour they spent in the air was an hour Gavin's legal team was using to tighten the noose. Damien reached for the satellite phone mounted on the cabin wall and dialed a number from memory. The call connected in 3 rings. "Miriam, it's Damien. I need you to pull up international trade dispute protocols under the Geneva Financial Arbitration Framework. Specifically, Article 19, Section 4, Cross-Border Asset Protection for Individuals Engaged in Active Intellectual Property Disputes." Chloe watched him. She didn't know who Miriam was, but the woman on the other end of the line started talking rapidly, and Damien listened with the kind of focused intensity that told Chloe this wasn't his first time navigating a legal ambush at altitude. He hung up after 6 minutes and turned to Chloe. "Article 19 establishes a protective shield for individuals who can demonstrate that an asset freeze is being used as a retaliatory measure to suppress legitimate intellectual property claims. If we can file a countermotion under the Geneva framework before the domestic injunction is processed, the international filing takes precedence. Your assets stay unfrozen while the IP dispute is adjudicated." Chloe leaned forward. "That only works if we can prove the injunction is retaliatory and not protective." which is why we need to submit your evidence package as a supporting exhibit with the countermotion. The timestamps on your original code predate Gavin's versions by over a year. The internal emails show a coordinated plan to steal your work. If we attach that to the filing, any reviewing authority will see that Gavin's injunction is designed to silence the victim of theft. And that changes the legal calculus entirely. Chloe pulled up the evidence file on her screen.
Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed that came from years of working under pressure. She began reformatting the package into a legal exhibit structure, numbered sections, indexed references, a summary brief at the top that laid out the timeline in plain language. Damien worked beside her, drafting the countermotion on a second terminal. They passed documents back and forth across the table, editing in real time. He handled the legal framework and jurisdictional language. She handled the technical evidence and financial trail. Their working rhythm was seamless, two people operating on the same frequency without needing to explain every step. 90 minutes later, as the jet began its descent into O'Hare, Chloe hit send on a secured transmission to Damien's legal team on the ground. The countermotion, the evidence package, and the supporting brief landed in Miriam's inbox at 11:47 p.m. Central Time. By 6 a.m. the following morning, the Geneva filing was submitted. By noon, the domestic injunction was stayed pending international review. Gavin's emergency motion collapsed before it ever reached a judge's desk. Chloe found out while sitting in the back of a car heading from the airport to the estate. Damien showed her the confirmation on his phone, without commentary. She read it twice, then leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes.
He's going to try again, she said.
Of course he is.
What happens when he runs out of legal options?
Damien looked out the window. The Chicago skyline was growing larger through the windshield, the first light of morning catching the tops of the tallest buildings. That's when it gets interesting, he said. Lake Michigan at night looked like a sheet of black glass stretching toward the edge of the world. The Marina Harbor Club sat at the end of a private dock on the city's north shore, a low-slung building with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound deck, and the kind of quiet that only existed in places where membership cost more than most people earned in a year. Chloe had come here for a reason she didn't love. Damien's legal advisory board wanted a face-to-face meeting to review the final arbitration strategy before the hearing, and the Marina's private conference room was one of the few spaces in Chicago where conversations stayed inside the walls. She arrived at 9:30 in the evening. The parking lot was mostly empty. A few luxury sedans near the entrance, a catering van near the service door, and a black SUV idling at the far end with its headlights off. Chloe noticed the SUV, but didn't think much of it. Rich people and their security details were a common sight at places like this. Inside, the conference room was warm and well lit. Damien's lead attorney, a sharp woman named Priya Sharma, had already spread documents across the oval table. Two associate lawyers flanked her, laptops open, highlighters scattered between coffee cups. Chloe sat down and opened her own folder, a printed summary of the evidence package with annotations she had added during the flight back from Boston. They worked for an hour. Priya walked Chloe through the arbitration process step by step. The opening statements, the evidentiary presentation, the cross-examination protocols, the standard objections Gavin's legal team would likely raise. Chloe absorbed everything with the same focus she brought to coding. She asked questions when the legal terminology got dense, and Priya answered them without a trace of condescension, which Chloe appreciated more than she let on. At 10:40, Chloe excused herself to use the restroom. She walked down a narrow hallway past the kitchen and the staff lockers. The building was quiet. Most of the club staff had gone home for the night, and the only sound was the low hum of the refrigeration units behind the bar. She was washing her hands when she heard footsteps, heavy ones, moving fast down the hallway outside. Then a second set, then a third. Chloe turned off the faucet and stood still. The footsteps stopped outside the conference room door. She heard a voice, male,
unfamiliar, clipped, and direct. "We know she's in there. We just need the drive. Hand it over, and we walk away clean." Chloe's stomach dropped. She pressed her back against the restroom wall and held her breath. Through the thin door, she could hear Priya's voice, calm and measured. "This is a private legal meeting. You have no authority to be here, and whatever you're looking for, you're not going to find it by threatening officers of the court." "Lady, I don't care about your court. My client wants his property back. The encrypted files, the server data, all of it. We can do this the easy way, or we can start calling people who make things complicated." Chloe's mind raced. These weren't random intruders. Gavin had sent them. The failed injunction, the collapsed investor relationships, the dismantled legal strategy. He was out of courtroom options. And now he was resorting to the only thing he had left: direct confrontation. Get the evidence back before it could be presented at arbitration. She pulled her phone from her pocket and typed a message to Damien. 3 words. "Marina, right now." His response came in 8 seconds. "Already here. Stay where you are." Chloe stared at the message. Already here? She pressed her ear against the door and listened.
The man in the hallway was still talking, his tone growing more agitated.
"You've got about 2 minutes to produce that drive before..." The front entrance of the club opened with a heavy bang that echoed through the building. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with coordinated precision, filled the main hall. Chloe heard chairs scrape. Someone dropped something metallic. Then Damien's voice, clear and controlled, cut through the noise like a blade through paper. "Gentlemen, you picked the wrong building." Through the crack beneath the restroom door, Chloe could see shadows shifting in the hallway. Damien's security team, 6 men she had seen stationed around the estate over the past few weeks, moved into position with the kind of disciplined efficiency that came from years of training. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten. They simply filled every exit, blocked every path, and made it physically impossible for anyone to leave without permission.
"Hands where we can see them," one of Damien's men said. "All 3 of you, against the wall, now."
There was a brief moment of resistance, a shuffling sound, a muttered curse, and then compliance. Chloe heard bodies being guided against the wall, pockets being emptied, phones being collected. The whole thing took less than 90 seconds. Damien appeared in the hallway outside the restroom. He knocked twice, softly. "Chloe, it's clear." She opened the door. The hallway was occupied by 3 men she had never seen before, all of them standing with their hands flat against the wall while Damien's team patted them down. One of them, the tallest, wearing a leather jacket and an expression that suggested he was regretting every decision he had made that evening, had a lanyard clipped to his belt with a magnetic keycard. Chloe recognized the logo stamped on the card. Apex Capital.
"They're Gavin's people,"
she said.
"They were Gavin's people," Damien corrected.
"Now they're evidence." Priya stepped out of the conference room, her composure intact despite the circumstances. She had already pulled out her phone and was recording the scene. The men against the wall, the Apex keycard, the timestamp on her screen. Documentation. Every lawyer's first instinct in a crisis.
"This constitutes corporate intimidation and attempted coercion of legal counsel,"
Priya said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had already started drafting the motion in her head.
"I'll have supplemental filings added to the arbitration case by morning. This just made our position significantly stronger."
Damien walked Chloe back to the conference room and closed the door behind them. His security team handled the 3 men outside, detaining them, collecting identification, and contacting the appropriate authorities to file a formal report. Chloe sat down in her chair and placed both hands flat on the table.
Her fingers were trembling slightly, and she pressed them harder against the surface until they stopped.
"He sent people to take the evidence," she said. "He actually sent people."
"He's desperate. Desperate men reach for whatever they can grab, and they always grab the wrong thing." Chloe looked at the documents spread across the table. The evidence package, the arbitration brief, the timeline of every crime Gavin had committed over the past 18 months. All of it was still here. All of it was intact. And now, on top of everything else, Gavin had just added witness intimidation and corporate coercion to his growing list of offenses. She picked up her pen and turned to a fresh page in her legal pad.
4 days until the hearing, she said.
Damien sat down across from her and opened his laptop.
Then let's make sure he doesn't survive it. The Commercial Arbitration Hall on South LaSalle Street was one of those buildings that looked like it had been designed to make people feel small. Marble columns flanked the entrance. The ceiling in the main corridor rose 30 feet above the floor, and every footstep echoed like a judge's gavel. Chloe had walked past this building once during law school orientation week, a guest lecture on dispute resolution that she attended because the free lunch was better than anything in the cafeteria. She never imagined she'd be back here as the central figure in a case that had the potential to reshape corporate accountability standards in the financial industry. She arrived at 7:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the doors opened. She wore a charcoal suit with a white blouse, her hair pulled back, her evidence binder held against her chest like a shield. Damien walked beside her in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Priya Sharma and 2 associate attorneys followed close behind, rolling a small case filled with printed exhibits, digital backups, and the original encrypted drives. The hearing room was smaller than Chloe expected. Wood-paneled walls, a raised platform at the front where 3 arbitrators sat behind a curved desk, a long table on the left for the complainant, Chloe's side, a matching table on the right for the respondent, a gallery of 8 chairs at the back for observers, already half filled with financial journalists who had caught wind of the proceedings through industry channels. Gavin Hayes was already seated at the respondent's table when Chloe walked in. He looked thinner than the last time she had seen him. The confidence that had carried him through boardrooms and investor dinners had been replaced by something brittle. His legal team surrounded him. 4 attorneys from a high-profile litigation firm, all of them in matching navy suits, all of them looking like they charged by the syllable. Gavin glanced at Chloe as she sat down. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. He looked away first. The lead arbitrator, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, called the hearing to order at 8 o'clock sharp. Her name was Judge Margaret Liu, retired from the federal bench, now serving as one of the most respected commercial arbitrators in the Midwest. She had a reputation for being thorough, impatient with theatrics, and completely immune to the kind of charm that men like Gavin relied on. This panel has reviewed the preliminary filings from both parties, Judge Liu began, her voice filling the room without effort. We will hear opening statements, followed by evidentiary presentations, followed by cross-examination. I expect both sides to be concise, factual, and respectful of this panel's time. Ms. Sterling, you filed the complaint. You may begin. Chloe stood. Her legs felt solid beneath her. 3 weeks ago, she had stood on a rooftop in this same city and watched her career get demolished in front of an audience. Now she was standing in a room built for justice, and the audience was listening to her. Thank you, Judge Liu. My name is Chloe Sterling. I am a financial software engineer with 12 years of experience in algorithmic trading systems. Between March of 2 years ago and July of last year, I independently designed and developed a proprietary predictive trading algorithm while employed at Apex Capital. This algorithm, which I named Project Meridian, was built entirely on my own intellectual framework, coded using my own methodology, and tested using models I created from scratch. She paused and opened her binder. On the evening of my termination, Mr. Gavin Hayes publicly claimed sole ownership of this algorithm and dismissed my role as that of a junior data assistant. I am here today to demonstrate, with documented evidence, that Mr. Hayes systematically stole my work, falsified corporate records to obscure the theft, and used the stolen algorithm to conduct illegal market manipulation activities that generated millions in fraudulent revenue. The room was silent. One of the journalists in the gallery leaned forward in his chair.
Chloe spent the next 40 minutes walking the panel through her evidence. She started with the source code comparison, side-by-side projections showing her original files dated 14 months before Gavin's versions with identical variable names, function structures, and even her personal comments still embedded in his code. She showed the metadata timestamps. She showed the internal Apex emails detailing the coordinated plan to extract her work and revoke her access. She showed the offshore financial routing through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and the fabricated patent applications designed to create a false paper trail. Each piece of evidence was numbered, indexed, and cross-referenced. Priya had helped her structure the presentation so that every claim linked to a specific document and every document linked to a verifiable source. There were no gaps, no assumptions, no leaps of logic,
Just a clean, devastating chain of facts. When she reached the section on the Nightfall Protocol, Gavin's secret project to build a legal defense based on forged development logs, the lead arbitrator removed her glasses and stared directly at Gavin. He didn't meet her eyes. Gavin's legal team attempted a cross-examination that lasted 22 minutes. They challenged the authenticity of the encrypted server data. Chloe produced the chain of custody documentation and the forensic verification report from an independent digital analysis firm that Damien had retained in Boston. They questioned the timestamps on her original code. She pulled up the operating system logs from her personal machine, showing file creation records that predated her employment at Apex by 3 months, proof that she had begun developing the algorithm before Gavin even knew she existed. They tried to argue that her access to Apex's private servers constituted corporate espionage. Priya stood and presented the supplemental filing documenting the Marina incident, Gavin's operatives attempting to intimidate legal counsel and steal evidence, which reframed the entire narrative around who was actually engaging in criminal behavior. By the time Gavin's attorneys finished, the damage was comprehensive. 2 of the 3 arbitrators were writing notes continuously. The third hadn't looked away from the evidence projections for the last 15 minutes. Gavin's team requested a 30-minute recess. Judge Liu granted 15. During the break, Chloe sat in a small waiting room down the hall. Damien brought her a cup of water and sat beside her without speaking. She drank half of it and stared at the wall.
"He's going to lose everything," she said quietly.
"He already has," Damien replied. When the hearing resumed, Judge Liu delivered the panel's preliminary findings with the efficiency of someone who had seen enough to make a decision and saw no reason to delay it.
This panel finds, based on the weight of evidence presented, that the algorithm known commercially as the Apex Predictive Engine is the sole intellectual property of Ms. Chloe Sterling. The evidence of systematic theft, falsification of corporate records, and fraudulent patent filings is substantial and uncontested by credible counter-evidence. She turned to Gavin. "Mr. Hayes, this panel is stripping your executive license effective immediately. Apex Capital's operations will be frozen pending a full regulatory audit. All intellectual property rights, licensing revenues, and associated financial assets derived from the stolen algorithm are hereby awarded in full to Ms. Sterling." Gavin's lead attorney whispered something in his ear. Gavin shook his head slowly, his face gray. "Additionally," Judge Liu continued, "this panel is referring the evidence of market manipulation and financial fraud to the appropriate regulatory authorities for independent investigation. Mr. Hayes, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel." The gavel came down once. The hearing was adjourned. Chloe closed her binder. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. 5 days passed after the arbitration hearing, and Chicago kept moving like it always did. Trains rattled through the loop. Tourists crowded the Riverwalk. Traders shouted into phones on LaSalle Street. The city didn't care that a man named Gavin Hayes had lost everything inside a wood-paneled room on a Tuesday morning. It had already forgotten him. That was the thing about cities like Chicago. They chewed people up and kept walking, and the only ones who survived
were the ones who learned to walk faster. Chloe spent those 5 days doing something she hadn't done in over a year. She rested. She slept past 7.
She ate breakfast sitting down instead of standing over a keyboard. She walked through the estate grounds in the mornings, following a gravel path that looped around a small pond where someone had planted Japanese maples that were just starting to turn copper at the edges. She didn't check her email until after lunch, and even then, she took her time reading through the messages. Congratulatory notes from former colleagues, interview requests from financial publications, and a long, carefully worded letter from Nina Okoro saying she had resigned from Apex Capital the day after the hearing and was considering a trip to Portugal. On the 5th evening, Damien invited her to the penthouse terrace at Vance Tower. He said there was something he wanted to discuss and that she should come at sunset. Chloe almost asked why sunset specifically, but she had learned over the past month that Damien did things with intention. If he wanted sunset, there was a reason. She arrived at 6:30. The elevator opened directly onto the terrace, a wide, open-air space on the 62nd floor with low stone walls, recessed lighting embedded in the floor, and a view of the city that made everything below look like a model someone had built on a dining room table. Lake Michigan stretched out to the east, flat and silver in the fading light. To the west, the skyline carved jagged shapes against a sky that was turning from gold to deep amber. Damien stood near the western edge, leaning against the stone wall with a glass of something dark in his hand. He had traded his usual suit for a black jacket over a white shirt, open at the collar. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him, which was still more composed than most people managed on their best day. "You clean up well for a Tuesday," Chloe said, stepping onto the terrace. "It's a Thursday. I've lost track." He smiled. A real one, not the controlled half-smile he used in meetings.
He gestured to a second glass sitting on the wall beside him. She picked it up and took a sip. Sparkling cider. She raised an eyebrow. "I remembered you said you don't drink during the week," he said.
I said that once, at the cafe in Manhattan. You were on the phone.
I was on the phone. I was also listening. Chloe leaned against the wall beside him and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, in an office building she used to enter through a side door because the front lobby made her feel like she didn't belong, Apex Capital's operations were frozen. Gavin's executive license was revoked. His accounts were under regulatory review. The algorithm, her algorithm, was legally, officially, and permanently hers. She thought she would feel triumphant. She had imagined this moment 100 times during the long nights at the Innovation Lab, the tense hours in the Airborne Command Center, the terrifying minutes in the Marina restroom.
She thought victory would taste sharp and sweet, like biting into something she had earned with her teeth. Instead, she felt quiet, full, like a glass that had been empty for a very long time and was finally holding something warm.
"I want to ask you something," Damien said, turning to face her. "And I want you to think about it before you answer."
Chloe turned to meet his eyes. The sunset was behind him now, outlining his shoulders in gold.
"I'm forming a permanent joint venture. Vance Global and your algorithm, combined under one entity. Equal partnership, equal authority, your name on the door next to mine. Co-director of Vance Global Enterprises."
Chloe's grip tightened on her glass. She opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. "Before you say anything, this isn't charity, and it isn't a reward. I've watched you work for 30 days. I've seen you tear apart a corporate empire with a laptop and a USB drive. I've seen you stand in front of a room full of people who underestimated you and make them regret it without raising your voice. I've built a lot of things in my life, Chloe. Companies, networks, systems. But I've never met anyone who thinks the way you do. You see patterns other people can't even imagine. That's worth more than anything I can put a number on." He paused.
I don't want an employee. I want a partner. Someone who challenges me. Someone who makes the work better. Someone I trust to sit across the table from me and tell me when I'm wrong. That's you. It's been you since the night I watched you stand up on that rooftop and refuse to let a man in a cheap suit erase what you built. Chloe looked at him for a long time.
The wind coming off the lake pushed a strand of hair across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear. She thought about the rooftop, the laughter, the word contributions spoken like a joke. She thought about the hotel room at the Langham, where she sat on the edge of the bed and wondered if anyone in the world would ever take her seriously again. 30 days, that was all it took. 30 days to go from the woman who was laughed out of a party to the woman standing on top of a building with her name about to go on the door.
Equal authority? She said. Equal authority. I get veto power on major acquisitions? If I get veto power on your coffee budget, you drink an alarming amount of coffee.
Chloe laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere she had kept locked for a long time. It echoed off the stone walls and disappeared into the evening air over the Chicago skyline.
Then yes, she said. I'm in.
Damien extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and steady, and he held on for a beat longer than a handshake required. When he let go, he turned back to the skyline and stood beside her in comfortable silence. Below them, the city lights were coming on. Office towers, street lamps, headlights crawling along Michigan Avenue. 1,000 lives moving in 1,000 directions, each one carrying its own weight. Chloe rested her arms on the stone wall and watched it all from above. 35 days ago, she had been fired in front of an audience. Tonight, she owned the most valuable trading algorithm in the financial world and held equal control over one of the most powerful enterprises in the country. The people who had laughed at her on that rooftop would read about this in tomorrow's headlines. Some of them would call. She wouldn't answer. The sunset faded. The sky turned deep blue, then black. Stars appeared faintly above the city glow, and the lake reflected the skyline like a second city floating upside down in the dark. Chloe Sterling stood on top of Chicago with the man who had chosen her when everyone else looked away, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The crown was hers, and she had earned every inch of it.